Hey, welcome back to the Pilot's Mindset. So, today is day 4 of the 29-day consistency challenge. How did you guys do? Be honest. It's tough, eh? And it's only day 4, so we have another 25 days to go. But you know what? We're going to do this together. And if for some reason we fall out of the grace, and for some reason we miss our target for the day, it's okay. We still have tomorrow. Remember, so long as we try, but we try in a smart way, meaning that we're going to try approaching things at a different angle, we have not failed. And even if we fail, so long as we learn from our mistakes, we're good. Okay. Today's topic, remember Pilot's Mindsets? The whole idea behind this YouTube channel is to transferring one of the major mindsets that we have as we operate the aircraft, aviate, navigate, communicate, to real life application. And today let's talk about the aviate portion, which is, remember, the physical, the mental, and the spiritual health. Today we're going to talk about the physical health, and especially the way we manage our energy in the flight deck, whether we're on a 5-hour flight or a 14-hour flight or a 16-hour flight, for instance. But before we talk about this, I need to tell you how we are going to assign a role to each pilot. So first of all, as most of you know, in most modern airliners, you have a minimum of 2 pilots. It is an absolute requirement, and you have a first officer and a captain, okay? Well, I hate to break it to you, but they actually do the exact same job. Yep, they do. Except that the captain is the one who has the ultimate responsibility and who's the one who's essentially at the top of the chain of command, and he's responsible for making final decisions, okay? Meaning that usually there's a markedly difference of experience between the captain and the first officer. Usually a pilot will start as a first officer in an airline and will slowly climb the ladder of all kinds of different experiences throughout the course of his or her career to eventually become upgradable, allowed to proceed through the training, which is quite challenging to become a captain. So first officer, captain, they both do the same job, but they usually have a different level of experience. But they do the exact same function alternatively. Let me explain. Let's say we have a flight that leaves Los Angeles, landing in New York, for instance, okay? It's a flight that's going to take approximately 6 hours, say. You know, they have a little bit of a tailwind, maybe 5 hours and 20 minutes. Okay, cool. For each and every flight, we are going to designate as a team, both captain and first officer, who is going to operate the aircraft, meaning the one who's going to be responsible for flying the aircraft manually initially and then with the help of the autopilot, and who is going to monitor the other pilot and be responsible for the fuel calculation and the radio work. We call this function pilot monitoring. We abbreviate it by PF, pilot flying, and PM, pilot monitoring. Okay, so now you've understood that there are 2 different grades in a flight deck: first officer, captain. Remember, there's a difference in experience, but they do the exact same job alternatively, meaning that from Los Angeles to New York, they are going to decide. There's no rhyme or reason. Usually we ask, hey, do you want to operate this flight or do you want to be the pilot monitoring? So do you want to be the pilot flying or do you want to be the pilot monitoring? So from, say, LA to New York, you're going to have a first officer say the first officer starts, so he's going to be the pilot flying, responsible for the trajectory of the flight, etc., and operating the autopilot, and the captain, who's going to be the pilot monitoring. Okay. Now, usually this would be treated as a round trip. It's going to be a long day, but it'll be treated as a round trip. So when they get to New York, say they have a 45-minute or hour and 15-minute turn or something like that, then the roles are going to get switched. And the captain is going to become the pilot flying, and the first officer is going to become the pilot monitoring. Okay? That's the first thing I wanted to clarify, because I've heard many times, oh, yeah, okay. So a co-pilot, I guess, doesn't do much. No, that's an absolute fallacy, so I just wanted to rectify this since we're talking about energy management. Why am I talking about these roles of captain, first officer? Because I'm going to introduce a third pilot, okay? We call this pilot a relief pilot. And usually we use a relief pilot in aviation for flights that are just over 8 hours in duration of flight, okay? And the way it works is the following. We're going to have a group of 3 pilots, captain, first officer, relief pilot. The captain and the first officer and the relief pilot are all going to be in the flight deck together for the most critical phases of flight, which is the takeoff all the way up to 10,000 feet, and then the approach and the landing from 10,000 feet down to the runway. Clear? Clear as mud? All right, let's carry on. Let's continue. So, the way we do things is, say we have a 9-hour flight. Now, say we're on the Eastern Seaboard, we are, say, in Montreal, and we're going to Athens, for instance. Okay, 3 pilots. The captain, the first officers, and the relief pilot are all going to be in the flight deck, remember, as they take off? Okay. As they take off and they reach 10,000 feet, they will have predetermined on the ground when the relief pilot is going to go on his or her brake. And that will determine if the relief pilot is going to replace the captain or the first officer. And it actually is the opposite. Usually, as we reach 10,000 feet, we ask, hey, who wants to take the first brake? And usually, as a courtesy, the pilot flying is the one who's going to decide which brake he or she wants. As you understand, the way we divide the time that we're allowed to go for rest in the bunk beds that are located somewhere in the aircraft. It's a facility where we can lay flat completely and rest fully. So the way we decide who is going to take the brake as a courtesy usually goes to the pilot flying, with the agreement of the captain, obviously. Because remember, the captain has the ultimate responsibility, and the captain is the one with the most experience, really. There's no other words. And as a result, the captain agrees or disagrees depending on his or her needs. Okay? And it rhymes, so it's cool. Anyway, let's carry on. Energy management. Let's not beat around the bush. So, the aircraft takes off. We get to 10,000 feet. Then, who's taking first brake? It is decided. Say the captain takes the first brake. The captain leaves the flight deck. The relief pilot then gets into position, is going to sit in the captain's seat. And the relief pilot is fully qualified to land the aircraft if we are encountering an emergency, or actually more realistically, the relief pilot is highly trained when it comes to rapid depressurization, like I was touching on yesterday, meaning a sudden loss of pressurization. It is absolutely critical to know what to do should the rapid depressurization happen. Okay, so the relief pilot is now in the captain's seat. Are you with me still? Okay, the first officer stays in his or her seat. And they're going to fly like this for maybe 2 hours and 50 minutes or something like that. After 2 hours and 50 minutes, the captain comes back. Hopefully, the captain has been able to get some rest if it hasn't been too crazy bumpy, right? And then the first officer now goes on his or her rest. All right? Then the relief pilot has to switch seats with the first officer. So it's a musical chair, right? It's a musical chair game. Practically speaking, picture the relief pilot in the captain's seat on the left-hand side of the aircraft. The first officer sits on the right-hand side of the aircraft. So you've got the captain who's coming back. So he waits for the relief pilot to leave the captain's seat. The captain then sits down in his or her seat. Okay? Then the first officer is going to transfer the responsibility of flying the aircraft to the captain, because at all times we want a bare minimum of one human being at the controls of the aircraft, obviously, since we do not have any artificial intelligence that can relieve us from doing the job we do yet. It's coming, but not quite yet. The first officer leaves the seat, and then the relief pilot now is going to sit in the first officer job. And then when the relief pilot is ready, if the first officer was the pilot flying, meaning the relief pilot now is going to be playing the role of first officer for the captain, then the captain is going to ask the first officer if he or she is ready to what we call have control, quote unquote, and he's going to transfer the responsibility of the pilot flying onto the relief pilot. The captain is going to endorse his responsibility of pilot monitoring, because remember, in this scenario, they decided that the first officer would be the pilot flying and the captain would be the pilot monitoring, exactly the same as my LA, New York scenario, exactly the same, but they could have switched. And then the relief pilot would have become the pilot monitoring. In the meantime, the first officer says, okay, guys or gals, goodbye, I'm going for my rest. And now he or she is going for his rest in the bunk beds for 2 hours and 50 minutes. That's it. Simple. Then once the first officer is rested, the first officer comes back. Okay. Then the relief pilot takes his rest. And after 2 hours and 50 minutes, the relief pilot comes back. And now they are, the three of us back in, the three of them, sorry. I felt at work all of a sudden. The three of them come back in the flight deck. And technically, everybody is rested at a level, okay? Of course, they're not going to be fully rested, but they're going to be rested at the level that is enough to reach the proficiency required so as to approach and land in safe conditions, no matter what the environmental conditions are. And you have to understand the crucial role of a relief pilot in the most critical phases of flight: takeoff, landing. It's a pair of eyes that is going to be invaluable. Why, you ask me? Because what happens is the relief pilot sits slightly aft of the first officer and the captain, and as a result, he or she is going to benefit from a big picture view. Okay, so he or she is going to be able to identify much quicker if either a mistake or a mishap has been made by either the captain or the first officer. Does that make sense? That's it about energy management. No, that's not it. So, Remember I told you we have up to 4 pilots. We talked about the first officer, the captain, the relief pilot. Well, let me introduce you number 4. Number 4 is usually a first officer that has been designated as a augmented pilot for the flight. Don't ask me why we call this person augmented, as if we were giving this person superpowers. It's pretty cool. I've been there, but let me tell you, I couldn't have flown on my own. I still needed the aircraft, so I don't think that I had superpowers. But I'll check in the future. Anyway, the augmented first officer or the augmented captain is a 4th crew member that is going to be necessary for flights over 14 hours, usually, depending on the rules of the country that the airline is based out of. And so, in a very simple way, it works exactly the same. For a flight that is, say, 15 hours, there's going to be a designation for who operates the flight, which pair operates the flight, and it's going to be decided way ahead of time by crew scheduling, the people that are responsible to assign the crew to a certain flight, and which pair is going to augment the flight. And it's going to be the relief pilot plus the augment pilot. So same principle applies. Very, very easy. We take off up to 10,000 feet. Then we switch pilots. Now, it's not one pilot that's going to go and have some well-deserved rest in a bunk bed and rest in a proper resting facility located in the aircraft, but it's 2. It's a pair. So usually what happens is the captain and the first officer are going to go either on their first break or their second break. So same thing, same courtesy apply, because you have to imagine that for the first, say, 3 hours of the flight, we could absolutely have the captain and the first officers that are designated as operating crew to do their job for the first 3.5 hours and then switch with the replacing crew, the augmented crew. But sometimes people would, for some reason, would like to get some rest immediately. So after 10,000 feet, they usually are going to talk about this. And once they reach cruise level, this time, once they reach cruise level, once we are in an area of less vulnerability, because there are less chances for something to go wrong with regards to distractions, okay? The workload has decreased at that point. Then they're going to switch. That's how it works. And on average, the rest we get on long hauls varies, of course. It varies depending on the flight because it has to be equally spread out between the crew members. But let's say on a Hong Kong flight, typically if you leave from the West Coast, it'll be 2 hours and 50, 2 hours and 40, something like that. And once again, the name of the game is, of course, you're going to get to your destination more tired than if you had slept the whole flight, like all these lucky passengers. I mean, they're not lucky. They paid for it, so of course they deserve it. I'm just joking there. You're going to get to your destination tired, but not tired enough to compromise the safety of the flight. That's the whole point of energy management. It's not going to be perfect, but you're going to be alert enough, especially with 4 crew members. Now you have 2 additional pairs of eyes that can monitor both captain and first officer from a vantage point that's aft of the position of both pilots. And as a result, it's a very, very, very precious resource for the entire flight. So that's it about energy management, guys and gals. I hope that you learned something today. And yeah, it's very well designed, I would say, and it keeps us all safe. If you have any questions, comments below. Who knows what the subject is going to be tomorrow? Maybe we'll head back more into the mindset of things. We'll see. All right. Looking forward to hearing from you. Bye-bye.